Thanks so much, Pastor John. I was so impressed when I heard that you were doing a sermon series on serving, and really thinking intentionally for almost 2 months about how you can serve the community. And I was especially grateful to John for giving me the invitation, because serving the community is truly at the heart of Mother's Choice. And that's because, when I think about that more than 30 years ago, when my parents and their friends from our church, the same church where Pastor John prayed for me all those decades ago, they started Mother's Choice, and it's really, they were just volunteers, just regular people in the community. Nobody really had a professional background, but they were just people in our church family who wanted to respond to the deep need in our city of babies and children who don't have families and pregnant teenagers. And now, 36 years after the start of Mother's Choice, we have an average of 900 volunteers a month. And they're mostly people from our church community, including people who are in this room tonight. I'm so touched to see you here. So I just want to say, I think that there's a movement. There's something happening here in our city where people want to care about the lonely and the vulnerable. And I have seen firsthand the power of serving the community. And I think for us as Christians, it's more than just something powerful. It's actually our calling. I was so blown away to hear those young people speak out the words from Jesus himself, that this is what our calling is. This is our purpose. This is why we're here on the planet. But I think it takes something for us to pause, and that's really what you've been doing through this series, to ask ourselves the question, how do we actually serve our community? And if you remember one thing that I tell you tonight, I want you to remember this. Serving our community looks like family. So I'm not going to speak too long tonight. I'm mostly just going to tell you some stories. But I want to break that simple sentence down. And I'm going to start with the word serving first. What does it actually mean to serve? If you look it up in the dictionary, of course, it says it means to work for, to do good for, to help. And the Bible tells us, and you can see this verse from the Gospel of Mark, but the Bible tells us that we are called to serve one another, to work for, to do good for, to help others, not just ourselves. Now, I'm talking about serving the family, and you can see behind me here in a moment, this is my family. Yeah. And that's right, it's a little bit unusual in Hong Kong, but believe it or not, I was born and raised right here in Hong Kong in a family of 7 children, and now I have 7 children. But I have 6 boys and 1 baby girl. Yeah. And speaking of serving and family, I was just really touched. I think God has a sense of humor that the Cambodia youth mission trip were here sharing their testimony today, because just a few weeks ago, I agreed to go on my own church's youth and family service trip to the Philippines with my oldest son, Paxton. Now, he's 12 and a half, and he really, really wanted me to go with him. The challenge was, and I'm being really open with you here, I really didn't want to go. I did not want to go on the youth mission trip to serve others. I'll be honest with you. Things have been hard for me. And I have a feeling they've probably been hard for some of you in this room too. Now, especially for me where I work at Mother's Choice, and the reality is the last couple of years, it's been 3 years since the last time I preached here at KFCI, But the last 3 years have been really hard years. And the reality is that Hong Kong, even though the COVID restrictions have been lifted, Hong Kong is actually facing a child protection crisis. And our work serving children and pregnant teenagers has never been more difficult. And if I'm being really open with you, I've been feeling really tired and maybe even a little burned out and discouraged. And feeling like, does our service even make a difference? But I knew my son, who's about to become a teenager, I knew that this was really important to him. It's a pivotal time in his life, and I knew that I needed to say yes. So I said yes, but another true confession here, I didn't read the bulletin that said where we were going or what we were doing. My son kept telling me to send the money in, so I wrote the check, I signed the permission slip, I sent photocopies of our passport, and I didn't actually know where really we were going in the Philippines or what we were going to be doing there. So we got there late at night, the week of Easter, and it was too late to get any details, and we woke up first thing in the morning, and we had a big team meeting. There were 38 people from our church. And they talked about the ministry where we were serving and all the different projects that we could get involved with serving alongside the local community. So they described it. They said they had a home for pregnant teenagers and women who had been abused and who'd fallen pregnant. They had a children's home for babies and children who don't have families. They had a school and a feeding program for underprivileged children, and they had a maternal and child health clinic. My heart sunk. I had just taken a precious week of annual leave to go to the Philippines and volunteer at an organization that does almost the exact same thing that I do every day here in Hong Kong. I was like, oh, do I really have to do this, Lord? I love this work, but I need a break. I need a vacation. And here I am doing the exact same thing. Then they went on to describe the projects where we could be volunteering. And they said you could cement stucco. They were trying to build more rooms in the school. You could do cement stucco. You could lay sod in the garden outside the children's home. You could paint the nursery. They even had an opportunity to volunteer in the clinic, helping to deliver babies and look after the newborns who came in for their well baby checks. And I tell you, I'm so happy seeing your beautiful baby there in the back because, I mean, obviously with 7 kids and working at Mother's Choice, I love babies. But the reality is I was there with my 12-year-old son who had no interest in going to the clinic. And so I found myself doing basically manual labor in the heat of the Philippine sun. And I didn't say anything out loud. Of course, I was there with the youth group and a parent volunteer, so I kept a smile on my face. But inside, I was pretty grumpy. I had a bad attitude. I was like, why am I doing this on my vacation? And every evening we would gather together with the other teams from our church, and they would talk about what they did. And the ladies who had come with their daughters had all been in the clinic, and they were delivering 3 to 4 babies a day. And can you imagine, a teenager in Hong Kong doesn't get the chance to deliver a baby in the hospital. So they were all so impressed. They thought it was amazing. And they kept saying, Alia, you really need to meet the head midwife. She's incredible. She's like an army general. She tells everybody what to do and where to go. She creates like a gentle birthing environment for the women who've been through a lot of trauma. She's amazing. She's gonna really be impressed meeting you because you've delivered 7 kids. So I said, yeah, I'd love to meet her. Anyway, the second to the last night, I am getting ready for dinner, and one of the other moms sees me and says, I see her, she's down in the dining room. You gotta come and meet her. Her name's Rona. So I come along and I see Rona and I say hello. And the lady from my church says, Rona, please meet Alia. She's one of the volunteer moms from the Hong Kong mission trip. And And actually, she runs a very similar organization in Hong Kong called Mother's Choice. But you're going to love meeting her because she has, and she doesn't even get the word 7 kids out of her mouth, because the woman suddenly bursts into tears. I mean, really crying. She's hyperventilating. She's mumbling. She's almost screaming. I thought she was having a heart attack, so I'm like looking around to see if they have a defibrillator. Eventually, she calms down enough, and I hear the words that she's saying, and she's like, 2005, was it you? Was it you? I've saved the card all these years. Was it you? And so finally, I said, what? I don't think I've ever met you before. Are you trying to say that you visited Mother's Choice in 2005? Definitely wasn't me. Maybe Gretchen, maybe Keating, maybe somebody else from our team. Why? And she proceeded to tell me the story. She said, I was a domestic worker in Hong Kong. And she didn't tell me what happened, but it was pretty clear from how she said it. She said, I experienced extreme trauma. And as a result, I was pregnant. She said, I didn't know what to do. I was so upset. And she's a medical professional. She's a nurse and midwife. So she said she tried to terminate the pregnancy herself 5 times, and it didn't work. She said she was so depressed, she would go on the street and see cigarettes and put them out on her arms. She eventually went to the top of her building where she decided that she was going to jump off. But she said she felt something stop her. Eventually, it came time for her to deliver her baby, and she went to the hospital, and she said, I still remember the name of the doctor, Dr. Ma. I hope one day I get to meet him. But he gave her a scan, and he said, Miss, you're going to have this baby, but I need to tell you that this baby has some very serious medical conditions. I don't know if it was a result of what had happened, but he said, this baby needs serious medical intervention. And she said she just started weeping because she thought, I can't stay here in Hong Kong where this thing has happened to me, but how can I go back to my home country with this baby who's going to need medical care? I don't have the support for that. And the doctor looked at her and he said, I know a place here in Hong Kong that takes really good care of babies. And they find families for those babies. I'll take you there. Now, she said, that was 2005. I brought the baby to Mother's Choice, and you guys took the baby. But you can't sign off on adoption right away in Hong Kong. It takes quite a long time period. So she went back, and about 2 weeks had gone by, and she said she just cried every day and every night as she couldn't leave the little boy, who she called Joseph, behind. So she came back to Mother's Choice after 2 weeks and said she wanted her baby back. And of course, they gave the baby back to her. And she said, I went back to the Philippines. She said, but that was the same year that the ministry where I was volunteering was started. And she said, because of what you did for me in my moment of extreme need, she said, I decided to become their head midwife. And now I have delivered 4,000 babies from pregnant teenagers and women who've been through trauma like me. And I started to cry because I thought, God, I had such a bad attitude. I didn't want to come here to serve. I felt like what we were doing, this manual labor, is worthless. And I feel discouraged back in my work at home in Hong Kong. And I thought I was going to the Philippines for my son. But I think God had me choose to go on that service trip with my church for me. It was a divine appointment. Because I'll tell you, Mother's Choice looked after that baby for 2 weeks. It wouldn't have even been in our impact report. We wouldn't have even counted it in our numbers. We would have felt like we didn't really do anything. But because whoever were the volunteers at that time said yes to serving, to volunteering, and that doctor, that woman has gone to another country and saved 4,000 children. And I thought, God, you're reminding me that we are called to serve others. And when we serve others, like Dr. Ma and those volunteers at Mother's Choice 18 years ago, God multiplies our impact. And when we choose to serve others, like I very reluctantly chose to do with Paxton, we can receive too, because I received an encouragement that God knew that I needed. So we know that serving is really important, but why do we serve our community? So next, I just want to unpack the importance of relationship and community. Now, the Bible says, and this is one of my favorite verses, 2 really are better than 1, right? We are built to be in relationship. Nobody, not one of you, not me, and not any single one of you in this room, you cannot go through life alone. We need each other. And when we serve, as I said, we're called to serve, we need to serve relationally. Okay, we need to become community for the lonely now more than ever in Hong Kong. Because I actually believe that this is a pivotal moment in Hong Kong history. Okay, we're at an inflection point, and it's not just in Hong Kong. I believe it's around the world. I believe that people will look back on this time and say everything changed, okay? And over the last few years, what we've seen happening in Hong Kong, and even since the last time I came here to preach, we've seen a huge rise in social isolation. Now, that was exacerbated by the social unrest and by COVID restrictions. But even now that we're all online, we have church online, we can have online school, we can do everything online. We've actually become much less connected as a community. And without community support, without people having deeper relationships with friends, with family, even with their faith community, we have seen more marriages break down. Yep, we have seen more mental health problems. I'm really blown away that you guys were doing Restore. It's so needed right now. We are seeing, as people are experiencing more financial stress, we've also seen a huge increase in Hong Kong in substance abuse. Okay? Now, all of this isolation and people going through all these problems without having people who can speak into their lives to support them, all of that has made families a lot more vulnerable. And that has led to this child protection crisis that I was telling you. We have never seen anything like it in Hong Kong's history before. We have more child abuse, more child neglect, more child abandonment. And the reality is there's actually tens of thousands of families right now that are very socially isolated where their children are at very high risk, and 4,000 children living in full-time residential care. I mean, we're really at a breaking point, and I think you just need to pick up the newspaper any day of the week here in Hong Kong to recognize what's happening. Now, the challenge for me, and this is what we see at Mother's Choice, of the children who enter into residential care in Hong Kong, most of them never leave. They spend most of their childhoods without a family. And I love, is it Elizabeth, the missionary from Cambodia? Babies without somebody to look after them die. Children need family. And so the longer children stay without that permanent legal family who love them, who'll look after them, even if they have food, even if they have a roof over their head, even if they have school, they're more likely to have physical and mental health problems. They're more likely to do drugs. They're more likely to drop out of school. They're more likely to go to prison. And of course, if they're a girl, they're the most likely to get pregnant between the ages of 12 and 25. And then of course, if you're a pregnant teenager without a family, your child is very likely to end up in the residential care system, and the cycle begins again, right? So it's a vicious cycle, but I'm standing here today with great hope. I'm not depressed, even though I was crying in the last song, because I want to tell you that there's actually something that is so much more powerful than this vicious cycle. There's something that breaks it, and that is family, okay? But the reality is no family, not my family, not your family, no family can do it on their own. Families need to be supported by their community. families in this church need to be supported by their community. And that's why, since I was last here, even with all the uncertainty and challenge of COVID, we actually started Safe Families. And that's because we were seeing so many young single mothers who wanted to parent their children. And actually, there are programs and there are things to support those women in Hong Kong, but they were struggling to even access or go to those programs or to receive those supports. And that's because they didn't have relationship. They didn't have anybody who could watch their child when they needed a break or need to go shopping. They didn't have anybody to talk through their problems or nobody to be their mentor or to be their role model. They didn't have any community. So that's why we started Safe Families, and it's not something, it's not the same as becoming a foster parent or becoming an adoptive parent. Safe Families is saying, I want to be community to a young single mom and her child and want to become an extended family. And actually, I was so blown away to see one of our amazing stars, single mom, Safe Family volunteers here in the front row. But I just want to tell you, what does it really mean to be community? I want to share two stories with you, two real stories that happened since I was last here and we started Safe Families. There was one girl, I was really moved by her story because she called her Safe Family volunteer crying, saying that she wanted to place her child into the orphanage and foster care system in Hong Kong. And her Safe Families volunteer was really upset. She drove over, went to her apartment and said, why do you want to place your child in the system? I thought you really wanted to take care of your baby. What's wrong? And she said, she was weeping, I'm a terrible mother. I can't take care of this baby. I'm a terrible mother. And she said, you're an amazing mom. Why do you think you're a terrible mother? She said, look at my baby. And the baby had scratches on his face. And she said, the baby keeps scratching his face and now the baby's face is bleeding. And her Safe Family friend, who's an experienced mom, said, oh, sweetheart, that's normal. Babies can't control their hands for the first few months, and their nails grow real sharp. You have to cut their nails, but that's normal. You can put the mittens on the baby's hands. It's not a big deal. And she was crying, I don't have any mittens. And she said, well, do you have socks for the baby? She said, yes, we'll put the socks on the baby's hands. It's okay. But I'm just telling you that, even though she had housing, even though she didn't have the strength to mother without community. And sometimes being community, it doesn't matter if you're single, if you're young or if you're older, if you're married or it doesn't matter. You all have something to offer. Another young girl's story who really impacted me and showed me the power of community is it was somebody from our wider church network here who agreed to be a friend. She said, look, I don't want to take care of your baby, but what I will do is I want to be the one. I'm going to drive you. Her baby was born a little bit sick and had to go to the MCHC, to the clinic, every couple of weeks. She said, I will bring you. I have a driver. I'll go in my car. I'll bring my car. I'll pick you up. I'm going to take you to the clinic because even if you have an appointment, you got to wait there like 2-3 hours, right? And so she came to visit us after the baby hit, I think 2 months old. She came back to Mother's Choice to visit us. And our house mother said, how are you doing? And she was crying again. She said, why are you crying? And she said, I'm just so touched. She said, even my mother, my boyfriend, not one of them has ever taken me to the hospital or came to visit me in the hospital. And this lady from the church who didn't feel like she could do anything, but she had a driver and could take her to her appointments, she felt so loved. She experienced the power of community. And so I want to tell you this about community. Community isn't about being a superhero, okay? You don't have to be a professional social worker or something like that. You just need to be someone's friend. You just need to be in relationship. That's what it means to be community. The God that we serve is a really good Father. And he's actually the author and designer of family. And family is really important to him. In fact, the Bible tells us that he is the father to the fatherless. He's the defender of widows. and he is the one who sets the lonely in families. And I believe that part of our mission and our calling to serving the community as a church is not only to be community for families that are vulnerable and struggling, but we are actually called to be family for those who don't have a family at all. And the truth is, family is not just blood, right? It's not just the people who we have a DNA connection with. And I really believe that it's important for us in the church in Hong Kong to redefine what family means. I love this quote from Mother Teresa, because she said that the problem with the world is that we draw the circle of our family, that means we define who our family is, far too small. Because I think the reality is that family isn't DNA, family is love and commitment, right? Because this is what I tell my kids when I'm trying to tell them what does it mean to be in our family. I say, family sticks together, okay? Family forgives each other. Family, we see the best in each other, and we walk through the worst with each other, right? Family tells you that you're never going to be alone. Now, there are so many who are alone right here in Hong Kong. I want to tell you the story of a little boy. It was actually a man on a bicycle who found him. He was a newborn baby, and he was left by the footbridge off the highway in Tai Po. The man on the bicycle saw the package moving, realized it was a baby, and he called the police. The police actually got there pretty quickly, and it was immediately obvious to them that the baby had very serious medical needs. And so they called an ambulance, and he was sent to the hospital. His condition was so severe that he actually spent 17 months in 2 different hospitals here in Hong Kong. And it was after 17 months that we got the call, and that was almost exactly 10 years ago, 2013. I was just 1 year into my new role as CEO of Mother's Choice. I tell you, I got that phone call and I was terrified. I was really scared. And actually, all of us were. Could we care for a baby with this severe medical needs? Would we ever be able to find him a family? Because we don't want to keep kids with us permanently. We're trying to aim to get them to be adopted or to go back to their birth families. And the truth is, with his medical diagnosis, we even wondered, would he even live long enough to be able to find a family? But even though we were scared, we said yes. And I'm so glad that we did. In 2015, we actually found an adoptive family for Nolan. That's what they called him in the United States. And they totally fell in love with him. And they were so blown away by his capacity for love. And I think that's really something that he learned from our local volunteers here in our childcare home, who loved him and cared for him so tenderly. And so they actually determined that they wanted to adopt another little boy who had been Nolan's best friend in our childcare home. Now, Francis was blind and had some other medical needs and was 8 years old by the time Nolan legally became his brother. But he got to experience what it meant to be loved and to join a family. And then just last year, at the height of our COVID restrictions and all the challenges we were having here in Hong Kong, that same family was inspired to adopt their 3rd child from Mother's Choice. Now, little Oakland was quadriplegic, just like Nolan. And honestly, if we had not had the courage to say yes to Nolan and then see him find a family, we wouldn't have had courage to say yes to her either. And so I want to show you their story because God designed for them to be in family. So.
I know there's gonna be some brighter days.
I'm not done yet.
I swear that love will find you in your pain. I feel it in me like the beating of life in my veins. I know there's gonna be some brighter days. I know there's gonna be some brighter days. Oh, ashes fall from burning dreams. Oh, never lived through times like these. Oh, if you're trying hard to breathe in the dark, in the dark, I know there's gonna be some brighter days. Yes, I swear that love will find you in your pain. I feel it in me like the beating of life in my veins. I know there's gonna be some brighter days. I know there's gonna be some brighter days. Oh, if your screams don't make a sound. Oh, if your walls are crashing down. Oh, if your heart just cries too loud all the time. All the time. Whoa, I know there's gonna be some brighter day. I swear that love will find you in your pain. I feel it in me like the beating of life in my veins. I know there's gonna be some brighter days. I know there's gonna be some brighter days.
When we began our journey with Nolan, it was heavy on my heart that his story is more than just coming into our family. We would always say, if nothing else, his story will encourage others to take that first step towards adoption. And it did. Our story is not about us. It really is about Nolan and that connection between him, Francis, and Oakland. Nolan also created a passion and avenue for me to help and encourage others to just go for it, and for me to advocate for these kids in need. There are days when choosing joy is very hard. Even on the hard days, though, I am the lucky one. Adoption is creating a family from broken places that all of us have, and then putting it back together to make a picture more beautiful than we could have ever created on our own. It's not about us or anything that we do special. It's simply that their stories do not have to end in an institution.
Our vision at Mother's Choice is every child in the city of Hong Kong in a loving family. And we know that that's the heart of our Father God for this city too. And we believe that it's possible for our vision to become a reality. In Hong Kong, in our nation of China, in our world, that every child can grow up knowing that they're safe, that they're loved, that they have a mother and a father. I'll tell you something. I believe that it's possible for Hong Kong to be the best place in the world to raise children. I believe that people will no longer leave this city because they want to give their children a better life, but people will move to Hong Kong because this is the best place for their children to be raised. I know that this is a radical vision and sounds crazy when you read the newspapers, but I believe that it's possible. I want to tell you something. It's going to take you. It's going to take us. It's going to take us, this is the church here in Hong Kong. It's going to take us to saying yes. We're going to start saying yes to serving, saying yes to being community for those who are lonely and isolated. And it's going to take us saying yes to being family. The children like Nolan and Francis and Oakland could be adopted right here in Hong Kong. Now, serving the community looks like family. And I want to tell you this, as you go out to dinner tonight, as you go home, as you meet up with your friends, I want you to think about, how you can serve, whether you sign up to give your time and your expertise to serve others, to go on the next mission trip to Cambodia, whether you volunteer at Mother's Choice Safe Families, become a foster parent, or you just show kindness to the lonely and the hurting who are right here in this room tonight. You greet the person who you don't know. You offer to take somebody out for coffee or for lunch. You visit somebody in the hospital. You invite, you see a single mom and you see if you can bring her kid to Sunday school or help her out. Whether you decide to open your own home and heart as an adoptive family, and I believe that there are people right here in this congregation who maybe not now, but maybe later, you could open your heart to adoption later. I believe that when we decide at Gong Fuk Church, the wider church here in Hong Kong, when we decide that we want to serve our community as family, that we are going to see our city, Hong Kong, transformed. So thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening to me today. Yeah, God bless you.